Hello. How are you? Today, I'm going to begin the process of remaking an old comic of mine from college, because going through your old art and cringing is the best form of self-care. That was a joke. I was in a lot of pain looking at my old pages. The reason I wanted to redraw my old comic is because I wanted to see the difference between my art in 2016 and my art in 2023. I also wanted to apply everything I've learned about comics since creating the story and try to improve upon it because it was a hot mess. I know I really shouldn't be saying such bad things about my old art. I mean, you have to start somewhere, but looking at it, there's just really the only way to go is up, let's be real here. If you're interested in seeing where this goes and want to hear about some useful things to think about when making a comic, then make sure to like and subscribe. We have spaghetti! Anyway, let's get the ball rolling. So, before we go anywhere, let's discuss the humble beginnings of this wonderful project. For those of you who don't already know, I have a degree in cartooning, although word on the street is that the department is called comics now, and in my sophomore year we had a class on storytelling, so telling the story through panel composition and things like that. For the end of our first semester, we had to do a short 10-page comic on whatever we wanted. At the time, I had a story in my head called 26 Days, where the main characters had 26 days to stop a plot run by some very corrupt higher-ups if they had any hope of saving life as they know it. Each of them had special abilities ranging from super strength to flying to manipulating time. But this short comic focused on one of the protagonists, Emily, who had the ability to manipulate color. I'm not sure what someone with a power like that would be doing in a situation with potential world-ending stakes, but 19-year-old me didn't care about rhyme or reason or logic, unfortunately. Although, thinking about it further, there is a lot of room for a potential why me situation, if you know what I mean. This short comic was called Heliotrope, and followed Emily and several other characters right before the situation began to unfold. On one hand, you had Emily and Elaine, similar character names, going about their daily lives blissfully unaware of what's about to unfold. On the other hand, you have Gray and Theo, two besties who are also caught up in the madness. Theo states that Emily is an important pawn in the ploy to stop the world-ending plot, while Gray just wants nothing to do with this. Reading over it, the story was, again, the only way is up. There's a lot of missed opportunities, the potential to put some juicy bits of world building, and 19-year-old me just never went full throttle. No wonder I got a B- in that class, holy Christ. I did ultimately graduate from college in good standing, and I made marked improvements in both composition and backgrounds, but Heliotrope always lingered at the back of my mind. Standing there. Menacingly. In recent weeks, I finally decided to bite the bullet and take up the task of remaking Heliotrope entirely. Aside from changes in character design, some of them major, there will also be changes in panel composition and changes in the script. Because it needs work. Fortunately, that's why we're here. So let's assess the state of the pages. On page 1, Emily is in a state of deep contemplation. Something is missing from the painting she's working on, but she has no idea what it is. She's interrupted by a close friend, Elaine, who comes to her with some important news. There's a lot to unpack here. Where do I start? No, seriously, where do I start? Let's break this down little by little here. For the record, if you're just starting out in comics or art, it's perfectly fine to make mistakes like these from time to time, and you don't have to start out drawing like Picasso, for example. I mean, almost no one does. But hopefully you can take something away from my old art, as well as my remake, and hopefully my self-critique gives you something to think about. Now, the first panel. This, honestly, is pretty weak in the way of establishing shots. There's no setting the mood, barely an indication of where Emily is, save for the minimalistic floor and the easel, and it's just incredibly skeletal. It's missing something. It's missing a lot. The whole comic suffers from this, but there are a lot of anatomical and lighting problems, and the backgrounds feel like wallpapers as opposed to a space with objects in it. And the perspective is nightmarish to boot. I think the problem for me was that I was, and still kind of am, really bad at perspective. So the more I struggled with it, the less motivated I was to get better at it. I actually took a background class in my senior year to try and help with it, and I think I did alright. I hope. So what I did for page 1 was I changed the establishing shot to a view of a place in Emily's apartment. When you're drawing an establishing shot, it is very beneficial if you can get as much important information down as you can. At the very least, give the reader a good enough idea from the beginning of where the scene is taking place. Is it outdoors? Indoors? There should be something other than just a blank box. And not only that, there's no breathing room for the characters, if that makes any sense. We get next to nothing about their personalities, and they just seem like cardboard cutouts with the illusion of personality. To be fair to myself, though, we were limited to 10 pages for the original assignment, and I think what happened was I kinda got freaked out because it was the first time I was working under such a constraint, and I had no idea how to properly manage my stuff. And I was also shooting myself in the foot another way by working on such a small canvas. Wait a minute. That's a 9 by 12 page, isn't it? Anyway, the remake of pages 1 and 2. I will be coloring in a couple of minutes, but for now, let's talk about the early stages like the script, the sketch, and the line art. Well, okay, I'm doing the line art here now, but my point still stands. Over the years, my way of writing a script has evolved, and I try to transcribe everything I visualized in my head onto the script. Part of it's because I need to have as much stuff down from my head as possible, or I will forget, but also because I want the story to come across even without the dialogue and the word balloons. A big part of my storytelling class was whether the story would be readable and come across to the reader even without the word balloons and the dialogue. The original Heliotrope suffered majorly from this issue, and during the sketch phase I distinctly remember the teacher saying, "This story must rely heavily on the dialogue because... I don't get it." Pain. Back in 2016, I just focus on the dialogue and have relatively minimalist descriptions of what went on in each panel, and I'd save the composition process for the thumbnails. Not the best thing for me, to be honest. On that note, you should also think about panel compositions. Try to vary them in a way that makes sense so that 1, the panel compositions aren't stagnant, and 2, the story just has that flow to it. There is a panel on page 2 where I had a mid-range view of Emily rising from her chair to greet Elaine. Well, her name is Anik now, but I changed it to an overhead shot because I didn't really like it, and honestly it felt kinda dull. I mean, it can work in theory, but it's all a similar camera angle. Think of it like a film, basically. If you're going to have similar shots throughout, at least make them visually interesting, or you run the risk of losing readers. Brain stimulation is hot. Wait, what? Anyways. One more thing I want to discuss with the sketching phase, and this is a personal thing I've learned, is don't get too hung up on the sketch, which happened to me way too often. You're just going to erase the sketch anyway, so there's really no reason to get so crazy about it. Anyway, after I was satisfied with the sketch, I went in with the line art and used the real G pen, aka the pen of all time, to ink everything. Something else that I really like about Clip Studio Paint is that there's a specific tool to make comic panels, and it's really useful in a lot of ways. You can adjust the panel layouts, and it's designed in a way that keeps your drawings inside the panel boundaries. Tasty! The main thing about line art and inking that I learned since making Heliotrope is that you should always try to incorporate line weight into your drawings to make things more visually interesting. In other words, make some lines thicker and make some lines thinner. As you can see in the original pages, there was no semblance of line weight, and every line was the same thickness. I think the same problem persisted in some way throughout the rest of my time in college. I'll probably post some examples in the future, but I think you can imagine what that looked like. The line art probably took me 1.5 hours to 2 hours for both pages. While I am of the mindset that your line art and drawings in general should be as readable as possible for both yourself and the reader, it's best not to overthink it so you're not making it more complicated than it needs to be. And my line art here is more simplistic anyway, so I think that helped. Now for my personal favorite part, the coloring. I wanted the remake to have a more simplified color palette and just an overall softer color scheme. The original had more vibrant colors, and looking at it, I have several questions. The story was meant to have more serious undertones, and this is personal preference, but I feel like the original doesn't convey that. Again, to be fair, I didn't learn about all the nifty things you could do with mood and color for another year, so I'll let it slide. For now. There is another reason why I chose the softer palette, and that was so I could avoid all the borderline harsh colors the original comic uses. There's nothing wrong with using vibrant colors, in fact, if you like that sort of thing, be my guest, but it just didn't feel right for a story like Heliotrope. So the flat colors took me another couple of hours, and once I was done with that, it was on to shading. Another thing that I used to struggle with big time was lighting and light sources and things like that. In the first 2 pages there's light coming from the apartment window, as well as an overhead light. I'm thinking like a ceiling lamp in this case, so I went in trying to make the lighting as consistent as possible, while keeping the shading somewhat simple so I don't drive myself absolutely mental. The shading was originally somewhat muted, but I did eventually bump up the contrast for that aesthetic. I did some experimenting here and there, but aside from bits and pieces of my usual shading style, there was a lot of paint bucket tool using and a lot of gradients involved. It was an interesting experience, and I might try using these sorts of techniques again in the future. There were some other adjustments I made in the later stages of remaking these pages, like giving Emily dark purple streaks in her hair. Mostly an impulse decision. Don't look at me. Emily and Anik both got big overhauls for their designs when compared to their old ones, and even though I put the redesigns together in the span of an hour, not something I usually do, but I'm doing this remake for fun, I just think they both look better. There's more personality to them, and in Emily's case, she doesn't look so childish. I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but her new design is a better reflection of her backstory and personality, and again, I just think she looks better. All in all, it was very interesting getting back into this story and making a comic like this, but I needed an excuse to flex my muscles, and I want to give this story the glow up it deserves. So, like I said at the beginning of this video, I will be remaking all 10 pages. It's most likely going to be a very laborious process, but I really want to do this, so hopefully I don't lose my mind, because that will be bad. Anyhow, I'm not sure how much else I can say without me rambling, so that is going to do it for this video. If you liked seeing the process of remaking this story, and you want to stick around to see me remake the other 8 pages, make sure to like and subscribe. I post videos every other Monday, and I've been covering the designs for some of my webcomic characters, and I also want to go back into doing book and show reviews like I set out to do when I started this channel last year. So, hopefully that's something that might interest you. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching.